The patch notes for Path of Exile 2 Return of the Ancients have finally arrived, and it's a big one. There are a lot of changes that were expected, and quite a few unexpected ones too, so in this video I'm going to cover my 3 biggest winners and 3 biggest losers for patch 0.5, beginning with the losers. And we're starting with Energy Shield Recovery. This is likely the largest overall nerf in the patch, with a huge amount of dedicated patch notes for various parts of the game making up a huge overall change to both how fast you can recover Energy Shield and how reliable that recovery will be. Most of these changes are aimed at the core recovery mechanic of Energy Shield, which is Energy Shield Recharge. By default, in PoE 2, recharge only begins after a 4-second period of not taking any damage to Energy Shield, and the base recharge rate is 12.5% per second, so it's much weaker baseline than the PoE 1 counterpart, but a lot of that was made up for by the large availability of modifiers that provide big increases to both the recharge rate of Energy Shield and the faster start of the recharge mechanic. This meant that in previous patches you could invest a trivial amount of passive points and maybe a few gear modifiers to ensure that whenever you did take some damage, you could fairly reliably recover that lost resource after a short while. However, in this patch, Energy Shield Recharge is firmly in the crosshairs of GGG, and most of these changes are coming from the passive skill tree, which has taken a huge hit in this regard, but there's also significant changes for gear, such as this one where you're no longer able to obtain faster start of ES modifiers on body armors, foci or jewellery, which is kind of wild. On the passive tree, many of the modifiers that provided increases to the rate the Energy Shield recharges have been outright removed or replaced, whilst modifiers that made recharge kick in faster are significantly nerfed. Most of those are now only providing half as much as before, or in some cases even less than half. And this list here mostly only compiles the broad changes to the passive skill tree. There are also more nerfs to this mechanic beyond the tree, for example some socketables and unique items that provided Energy Shield recharge rate or faster start of Energy Shield recharge now provide much less of those stats, or in some cases they don't provide them at all anymore. Now these changes are going to result in quite a significant power loss for pure Energy Shield setups in particular, which were one of the strongest performing defensive setups in previous patches, and to achieve similar levels of both recharge rate and recharge delay as before, you're going to now need to invest a lot more into this mechanic. More passive points spent, more sockets and modifiers on your gear, but notably, the amount of Energy Shield pool that you can reasonably obtain is largely unchanged, and GGG discussed in the Q&A that they'd like this resource to be more of a defensive barrier that competes with armor and evasion, and less of a replacement or competitor to life. So these are the steps they're taking to try and achieve that. However, one of the other overperforming defensive setups is Hybrid, Evasion and Energy Shield, which is also taking a hit in 0.5 as a result of quite a large nerf to Ghost Dance. This persistent skill would provide instant recovery for your Energy Shield based on your evasion rating upon being hit, and it would do this by expending a Ghost Shroud stack, which would gain on an interval. But in the upcoming patch, it will now instead provide regeneration over a 4-second period after being hit, which is still quite good and will provide more overall recovery on a per shroud basis, but notably the window to gain Ghost Shrouds is going up significantly, and it's no longer tied to the duration stat, so you can't invest into reduced duration or socket compressed duration into the skill anymore, and instead this window is affected by modifiers to cooldown recovery rate. This is a big change because cooldown recovery rate modifiers are generally quite hard to come by, and perhaps more importantly than that, they're calculated differently. Even with an absurd amount like 100% increased cooldown recovery rate, that would only half this window, and realistically for most builds you're not getting anywhere near as much as that. So this hybrid archetype is going to be a bit more threatened now because it's lost the burst recovery that it used to have before, and you're now only going to be recovering at a baseline of 2% of your evasion rating per second because this modifier doesn't stack. It only checks if you've been hit in the last 4 seconds and it's either active or not. So overall, these are some of the most substantial nerfs in this patch, and builds that relied on Energy Shield in previous patches are going to feel a lot weaker in 0.5. You'll still be able to get a large pool of this resource, but recovery may pose a problem. Next up in the biggest losers is the Pathfinder. Now in 0.4, Pathfinder was one of the most played ascendancies, mostly for bow-based poison setups, and if it wasn't for the addition of the Druid class in the Fate of the Vile League, which added a whole bunch of new skills and playstyles, well, we likely would have had another Deadeye situation from patch 0.3, where the ascendancy made up almost half of the played classes in the early weeks of that league. However, the Pathfinder's popularity has driven some big nerfs to this ascendancy in the upcoming patch. Firstly, the overwhelming toxicity node, which doubles the maximum poison count you can inflict on enemies, is having its less poison duration modifier increased from 35% less to 50% less. This one is brutal. The base poison duration is 2 seconds, so with this notable allocated on a Pathfinder, you'll begin scaling your poison duration from just a 1 second baseline. And to use this node effectively, you need to ensure that you have the means to maintain your maximum poison stacks on single targets to get the full benefit. Now this means that on many builds, you're now going to need to invest even more into either your poison application speed, for example your attack speed, or just your poison duration to maintain those stacks. And this also means that mechanically, some skills will be superior right off the bat simply due to how they function. For example, skills like Gas Grenade or Gas Arrow that create poison clouds on the ground. These clouds constantly inflict poison on an interval, and whilst you can't modify the application interval directly, you can stack these clouds on top of each other, and that means that they naturally can help to maintain poisons on a target. However, I think the larger impact of this nerf will be in regards to other poison builds popping up on different ascendancies, using the investment that they would have gone into for poison duration and application speed on a Pathfinder to simply invest into more damage instead, to compete with the double poison stack cap directly with less poisons that deal more damage individually. But this isn't the only change to Pathfinder in this patch, because this ascendancy is also receiving another nerf to a notable that was actually picked even more, that's the running assault node, which was selected on an incredible 84% of Pathfinder builds in 0.4. This node now only provides 30% less movement speed penalty from using skills while moving, down from the previous 50%, which is quite significant, and that means that these builds are generally a bit slower, and if you also consider the defensive nerfs to evasion and energy shield from the previous section, these builds will likely get hit a bit more because they're a bit slower, and then they'll have a harder time recovering from those hits. Notably, however, the immunity to heavy stuns while sprinting still exists on this node, so it's still going to be very good even after this change. Now let's move on to the third and final loser for this video, it's Expedition. Yeah, I'm talking about the league mechanic itself because for some reason in 0.5, the way Expedition functions is being changed to just make it worse. Each explosive will now wait to explode until most of the monsters from the previous explosion have been killed. I feel like this change just removes some strategy from this mechanic. You're no longer able to wait for all of the explosions and attempt to clear them all at once. Instead, you now need to wait and clear each area separately, and I just see this as an overall net negative. They're removing some choice that you had before in terms of how you interact with these encounters, and now you just must do it this one way. I don't really have much else to say about this, I just hope that they decide against this change. Okay, let's move on to the biggest winners, beginning with Totems. Yeah, this is definitely one of the unexpected changes in 0.5. Totems are getting a lot of love. Ancestral Bond is being reworked to now have some more specialised interactions with totem skills that spend charges to be placed, that being Spell Totems and Ancestral Warrior Totems. When you have this keystone allocated, you'll no longer have any skill cost to place totems, and those totems that usually require charges will be placeable without spending those charges. The keystone also no longer removes the limit entirely on totems and instead now doubles the limit that you already have. So for example, a level 23 spell totem has a base limit of 3 totems, so with the keystone allocated you'll have a limit of 6. Lastly, Ancestral Bond is keeping its reservation cost of 75 spirit per totem, and this means you're going to be able to play a pure totem build in 0.5 that doesn't require some obscure method of obtaining huge amounts of charges. But to do so, you'll need to obtain a large amount of spirit and likely forgo the use of any other reservation skills. Importantly, generic reservation efficiency and reservation efficiency for meta skills will work to lower the reservation required per totem, This means that Efficient Inscriptions is likely going to be the best in-slot anoint for totem builds, and we may see some players going for Invoker too, as this ascendancy has access to 50% of this stat. With these modifiers, you'll be able to maintain a higher total totem count with less total spirit, and you'll likely want a combination of both reservation efficiency and spirit stacking to reach your maximum totem cap. However, this wasn't the only improvement to totem setups in 0.5, because there are also 2 targeted buffs for each of the Ancestral Warrior Totem and Spell Totem. If you didn't know, Ancestral Warrior Totem had a ridiculous delay which wasn't even visible on the gem. Palsteron found that out the hard way last patch, and that's being removed in this upcoming update, and it will now instead have a delay that's based on the attack time of the socketed attack. This means that you'll be able to scale attack speed to lessen the delay, which is a big win. But the bigger win is coming for Spell Totems, which will now be usable while moving. Now, we don't really know exactly what this will look like for 0.5, but the previous totem summoning animation was really bad, so being able to move at the same time will be a big improvement, even if the movement speed penalty is harsh. And I do have to question here why this wasn't also passed on to Ancestral Warrior Totem, considering it's not like you're actively swinging your mace to summon a totem, so why can't we also move whilst using that skill too? Next up in the biggest winners, it's resistance swapping. Absolutely huge win for PoE2 in this upcoming patch. Resistance swapping has been one of the most requested crafting additions to the game for a long while now, especially after the crafting improvements of the last several leagues combined. It feels like this was one of the last things that needed to make its way into the game to make that gear progression for your character feel that much smoother. Well, in 0.5, you'll now be able to do just that with the new Flux currency items that can be crafted using the new Runes of Alder Remnant crafting mechanic. These items will allow you to switch resistance modifiers on your gear from one elemental type to another, and I don't really have too much else to say on this topic other than I think this will just be a great addition to the game, especially in regards to SSF, and I just hope they're not too rare to come across. Lastly, in the biggest winners for this video is the campaign improvements. Now, we already had a bunch of information a while back about the coming campaign improvements in 0.5, but the patch notes have revealed even more, and these are really good changes. We're going to see some improvements to the area order in Act 3, and these combined with some areas being shortened, and this massive change right here to the waterway zone, where the levers are simply replaced with pressure plates that you walk over, will make a vast difference to the general feel of this act, which I think, all things considered, is one of those parts of the campaign that hasn't felt great overall compared to the rest of it, especially the middle section of Act 3, where you go through the sunken city and into the pyramid. Hopefully those zones are the ones that have been addressed. But there are also more improvements here to Act 2 as well. There will now only be a single Dreadnought zone. This is one of the worst zones in the entire act in terms of layout and being swarmed by monsters, so running the layout once is an improvement, and you now no longer need to visit the Halani gates either to proceed at the start of Act 2. That means if you've freed Rizu, you can just progress straight away into the Traitor's Passage, which makes sense and is another good change. And I do hope that we continue to see these types of improvements over many patches, though I will say that Act 4 was a significant step up in quality, so perhaps we won't need many more of these types of changes in the future. We'll have to wait and see with Acts 5 and 6, which are surely coming in 1.0 at the end of the year. But that's it, my 3 biggest winners and 3 biggest losers for patch 0.5. What are your thoughts on the patch notes for Return of the Ancients? Let me know by commenting below, and thanks for watching this video. As always, stay tuned and stay safe.